Hey, everybody. Let me get my slide up there. So while that's going on, I was just going to say, people have been begging me to come up here and do a talk. No, not really. I'm the lowest common denominator. On Slack, they needed somebody to come speak, and so I was like, yeah, I can come up with something and try to help out. And my point with that is, if I can come up here and do this, I guarantee you can do this. If you got something in the back of your head that you'd like to share with people, they'd like to hear it. The opportunity here is we've got multiple levels of experience. So whether it's super advanced or just intro, it would be useful. So I've got a Star Trek theme for our Bloodhound presentation today. Star Trek is probably blasé at this point for a theme, but I just couldn't help myself. I found out on Amazon that you can stream all the Star Trek shows for free if you're an Amazon Prime member. So I'll also just point that out. So like a month ago, I started watching them all sequentially. And there's some younger people here, so if you haven't watched Star Trek, go check it out on Amazon Prime. It just may change your life. So Bloodhound, what is it? It's really a post-exploitation enumeration tool. So once you get that initial foothold and you're trying to figure out where to go, this is a tool you might be able to look at. It was developed by these three individuals, well-known members of the security community, very, very smart. If you haven't heard of them, Google them, look them up. They have other talks and other things they've been done. It was released during DEF CON 24, so almost 2 years ago. So it's not super new, but so it's been around a little bit. You can also check out the original talk at B-Sides Las Vegas before they had released it at DEF CON. They gave a talk there, and there's a link for that. They're also still actively developing the tool. They released 1.5 a couple months ago. I don't have a lot of those components integrated in my talk because I had not messed with that yet, but it looks like some really neat features. So what is Bloodhound exactly? It uses graph theory to try and illustrate Active Directory relationships within Windows, and some of them are not obvious. Their big presentation is 6 degrees of domain admin, kind of like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, if that helps illustrate it for you. But specifically, it's going to show you who's logged on where, who's the local admin, who's domain admin. It just helps visually enumerate all those things for you. So there's kind of three main components of Bloodhound. You have your backend database, you have your pretty Bloodhound JavaScript front end, and then you have your data collector tool that's going to go out into the Active Directory and actually pull the data. I forgot to mention that this talk is quasi-sponsored by 515 Brewing, and so if anybody gives some good audience participation and you're over 21, we have some free beer coupons for you. And my first question as part of this participation is, does anybody know the common backend database for Bloodhound if you've previously used it? Crickets. No. 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 All right. It is called Neo4j. Yay. There will be some Star Trek trivia. Yes. So what can Bloodhound be used for? Different things, use your imagination. But a common scenario is you've got a normal user account on the domain with little to no privileges, and you want to elevate up to a different group, domain admin, whatever it is. This will help you map out the path to get to that. I have the examples. Domain admin, local admin, and derivative admin. And derivative admin is like linking the admin rights between different accounts to end up where you want to be. And this really illustrates it for you. Dr. Pulaski, kind of like this. No, Dr. Pulaski, not like this. You're wrong. No one likes you. we have a fan. This is to really detect Romulan cloaks coming over the border and really not active directory enumeration activity. In fact, we would prefer, Doctor, if you would just kind of leave the ship and not come back for season 3, and no one will ever hear from you again. Okay, great. So some common uses is if, oh, wait, Star Trek trivia. Before I get into this, so we have a picture here of 3 phasers being shot at something. Can someone name what that something is? It doesn't have to be specific. No. Yes. Automated drone self-defense system. They beamed down to this planet, and then it just started attacking them. And they kept, it adapted. It kept getting stronger and stronger, so it took all 3 phasers at this point. Anyway, so attackers, what can you use it for? Obviously, you're going to use it to path out how to get elevated rights. You know, if you have that initial foothold in the system, that's great, but it may not be exactly obvious what you need to do next. You may have access to other machines and other boxes, but it may take a considerable amount of time to go through all those and enumerate who's logged on and get different credentials. This will kind of show you the path. I like to say it's almost the easy button for a somewhat secure, well-patched environment. So, you know, you're not able to just run really easy exploits on the machine. You actually need to figure out the path to domain admin. The other great aspect is if you're doing a pen test, you know, you may just have that one path that you can show your client that, you know, here's how I got to domain admin. But with Bloodhound, you might be able to show them, you know, yeah, I used this one way, but here were 20 other ways we could have used, and that's a lot more useful information for them to use. As a defender, the same things are true. You're going to see all the paths that a potential attacker could take and, you know, try to defend. It also is going to show you active sessions. So this is almost a compliance type of activity. But if you have domain admins going out logging on your development boxes, this is going to show you that activity, and you can be like, Mr. Domain Admin, why are you logging into these development boxes? You should be just using these on the domain controller. You can also use it to illustrate who has local admin. That's not always readily apparent. So you can look up a specific user, and it will show you where that user has local administrative privileges. And finally, attackers are potentially going to use this tool. So you need to run it. You need to be familiar with it. You need to try to see what signatures it produces so you can detect its activity. So this is kind of the, not default, but this is actually Bloodhound illustrating all the domain admins. You can see in the upper left, it's probably very small. It says find all the domain admins, and that's when I clicked on to get this screen. There's lots of tools to get to this, so this is not, you know, that spectacular of a thing. Although I will point out visually, it's kind of nice to see. You can see the domain admin group linked to this other information technology group, and everyone in that information technology group inherits domain admin privileges. And visually, that's just really easy to see. There's lots of pre-built-in queries you can use. What I'm going to point out here is, you can probably hardly see it, but in the upper left, there's a little tiny road icon. And that road icon allows you to specifically map out users to whatever endpoint you want to be, whether that's domain admin, a certain machine, or a certain group. Oh, there it goes. I built this on Windows, and now I'm running in Linux, so my animations are not quite right. So as soon as the Enterprise flies by, yep, there it goes. We can switch lights. Well, I will point out, in researching this, there are several Star Trek-themed fonts, including Star Trek Wingdings, and that is where the Enterprise came from. So, let me kind of try to paint a scenario for you where Wesley, the intern, clicked on the thing, and now you have user rights as Wesley in the domain. So as Wesley, I want to figure out, so this is our mapping tool. I put Wesley in as the top, and I want to say, I want to get to domain admins at the bottom. What do I got? So when I type that in, it gives me this graph. And as I zoom in a little closer, that's a lot of rage, Wesley. You can kind of see what's going on. So up in the upper left up here, you've got Wesley as the user. And there's three components here. You've got the user, you've got the group, and then you've got the computer. And we'll map, this is mapped it all the way to domain admin. So Wesley is a member of the acting instance group. Now, I don't know who else would be in that group. It's probably only Wesley, so I don't know why it exists, but it's there. Acting instance group is administrator of phase converter 23 machine over here. Well, earlier in the day, Wesley had problems with phase converter 23, and Lieutenant Barkley came and helped him out and logged onto that machine. So Lieutenant Barkley has a session on that machine. So you know the next route is to get on phase converter 23, run Mimikatz, dump the creds for our friend Lieutenant Barkley. And as Lieutenant Barkley, we're now a member of the main engineering group. The main engineering group is administrator to Warp Core Server 16. Warp Core Server 16 has a session from Lieutenant LaForge, which makes sense because he's the chief engineer. So if we get on Warp Core 16, run Mimikatz, dump our creds, we now are Lieutenant LaForge, and guess what? Lieutenant LaForge is a member of domain admins, and we've just got domain admin. Easy as that. So how does it work? I'm not going to go through it in depth on how to install it. You can Google that and figure that out for yourself. It is not hard. But when I talked about the three components, I talked about the data gathering tool. And there's really two main ways of gathering the Active Directory information. There's a PowerShell script, thanks to Will Schrader. And there's also a C# program called Sharphound. Sharphound is going to be their main method for Active Directory enumeration going forward, but the PowerShell script still does work. I personally like the PowerShell script because chances are it'll be running on the client computers in the directory, in the domain. The C# program is a separate program that you may have to help bring in, and it could be detected. But both methods will enumerate the domain, and it will use the Active Directory credentials you are logged in as. So, if Wesley clicked on the thing, and now you're him, or you're pen tester, and they just gave you credentials, that's what it'll enumerate as. There's some options that are now defunct, but they still kind of work, where you can actually run the command and directly feed it into the database, or you can just run the defaults and it will export out to a CSV, and then you can open up Bloodhound and import that CSV into the database. And that is the current recommended method. It's as easy as you can see you have the example command in PowerShell, get Bloodhound data. That'll just run the defaults, export it to a CSV, and there you go. But what's that mean, counselor? So again, it uses the account whatever you launch the program running as. Will kind of wrote the enumeration activity, and this is directly from him. It uses a netlocal group members Windows service provider as an enumeration technique. This is also a PowerView enumeration technique. If you don't know what PowerView is, I would suggest going and looking it up. It's some great tools. The other part is it will enumerate different data from the domain controller and correlate them and try to figure out who has local admin just based on talking to the domain controller. And so there aren't a lot of specifics there because I don't have them. But that's another future research topic. If you're interested, I'm sure that information is out there. But when you do this enumeration, it just generates some noise, at least when you run at default level. And depending on your logging level, this is going to show up in your logs. So here I have an example log from Bloodhound itself. So what it's going to do is going to generate a Kerberos authentication log. That's event 4769. It's going to, if it worked, it's going to be an audit success. It's going to actually be generated from your domain controller. If you can't see that, it says PDC, DC for domain controller. The account name is going to be the account name that Bloodhound is enumerating from. The service name is going to be the workstation it is enumerating at that particular moment. So as it goes through the entire domain and knows all the different machines, that value is going to continually change. Most everything I've shown previously is going to stay the same, but every single log message, this is going to be a different machine. The last one is the client address, and that's where Bloodhound is actually originating from. So this actually came from a production environment. That's why I have it censored out. But with all that information, I'm sure you probably you can start thinking of ways that you could detect this activity just from these authentication logs. So here are kind of some other basic detection techniques. Look at your logs, set alarms based on that. Based on what I showed before, you shouldn't have a single user account from a single IP address logging into your entire domain within a couple minutes. That just doesn't make sense. Don't let people do that. Maybe there's a service account that's supposed to do that, mark that as a false positive, and make sure you have this rule in your environment to look for this type of activity. You can also increase your logging levels. That will show you more. That's something you can go out and Google, figure out. There's a tool out there called Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics. How many people have that deployed in their environment or would like to admit it? 2 people. Okay. It's a great tool. I would highly suggest you look into it if you don't know anything about it or if you haven't used it. Chances are you may already have a license for it, so you can just deploy it for free. And it will detect Bloodhound activity. However, if the attacker knows it's there are some evasion techniques that they can use. Some other methods of detection, network activity. You're going to see a high level of LDAP traffic coming from the source machine to the domain controller. Chances are no normal machine should have that level of LDAP activity. It just wouldn't make sense. The PowerShell activity, if you see people running these certain scripts or doing things in PowerShell and you have endpoint protection that can detect that type of PowerShell activity, build a rule to look for this type of thing. Honey tokens. A couple different ways, maybe some specific things you can alert on when those counts are enumerated. Get an alert, check out what's going on. Or just fill your domain with all kinds of fake stuff. So when somebody runs Bloodhound, enumerates your domain, maps it out, there's so much noise, it's really hard to figure out what's real and what's not, and can kind of slow them down and hopefully give you the opportunity to figure out what's going on. Anybody else have any other methods or anything that they have used or can think about just now for detection? Crickets. There's free beer on the line. Except you can just get it in there. I think that's part of my... I don't know. So some evasion techniques. Before I get into that, this is probably a really hard Star Trek trivia because I don't even know the answer. But Wesley is hiding here from some scary-looking Enterprise security guards. Can anybody name the episode of what's going on here? I don't know. So you win. But back when I started using Bloodhound, some of the techniques, evasion techniques, have now been built into the tool. So they actually have a stealth flag that will kind of slow down and reduce the amount of enumeration that happens, sacrifice data quality for reduced network impact. But that's the reason to build your rule, right? You want them to have to run the stealth flag because they're not going to get as good information. Also, slow down what you're doing. There are performance flags in the program. Slow down how fast it goes and enumerates the domain. If someone has a time-based rule to check for activity, if you go a little slower, it may not trigger that rule. Definitely exclude the domain controllers from your enumeration list. Kind of the downside of Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics is that it's only monitoring domain controllers. So if you don't enumerate the domain controllers, ATA is not going to see it, it's not going to get an alert, and you're not going to be detected. And as a defender, try out if you install Bloodhound, try out all these techniques. See what it takes to generate alerts. See what it takes to evade them. Through your experimentation is how you figure out how this works. Does anybody know of any other good evasion methods for Bloodhound? You could just make something up. Active cloaking, yes. That is a totally valid method. Even though it's banned by the Treaty of 2360. I don't know. But we're not there yet. So last slide. I had to put the facepalm meme in at some point, right? This is a triple facepalm. The whole point of this is don't make it easy. You don't want to be that company or place where, the attacker or the pen testers roll in, run Bloodhound, get the path of domain admin, and then moonwalk out 30 minutes later. Make it hard for them. Make them work for it. Make them come up with, use their brains to come up with methods that actual attackers will use. It just improves it for everyone. So with all that, I also have it running on my machine if anybody wants to see a live demo. Are there any questions? Temporal Cold War. You don't want to go there. It just opens a can of worms. Nothing? All right. Thanks, everybody.